Manish, the Congress tried what was called a very soft line on Pakistan, and it got India nowhere. The BJP says it's time to attempt a different approach, a more hardline, tough approach, and see where that gets us. Do you think that the Congress's soft policy on Pakistan failed, and it is indeed time to give Prime Minister Modi and his tough line a chance?
Can I speak from there?
Yes, of course you can.
Standing and speaking. First of all, let me thank Mr. Puri and the India Today group for organizing this roundtable. Which India and Pakistan really need to have, and which is something which has been swept under the table completely, is that both India and Pakistan are nuclear powers. And our command and control is extremely opaque. At the height of the Cold War, when the missile flying time between the US and the USSR, or the former USSR, was 20 minutes, there was a regular exchange of strategic force commanders to feel each other out as to the guy who's going to sit in the hot seat, what is he really like? And between India and Pakistan, when the missile flying time is 1 minute, and the tacticalization of nuclear armaments is taking place, that's a very, very serious dialogue, which India and Pakistan need to have, and maybe at some point in time get China into it. Similarly, piracy. I mean, we've been part of multinational task forces, against piracy in the Gulf of Aden and the Horn of Africa, stretching right up till the Arabian Sea. Now, that's another area of cooperation, naval cooperation, which India and Pakistan can identify. So therefore, you see, essentially, on terror, I think India and Pakistan have divergent takes. The former foreign minister is absolutely correct when she says that Pakistan is also experiencing the ravages of terror. But the fact is that in India there is a perception that there is a cherry picking of terrorist groups which takes place. While terrorist groups which are on the western borders are targeted, terrorist groups, especially the Punjab-based groups, are actually given a free hand. But that divergence will continue to remain, and ultimately, the security of every state is the responsibility of that state. And therefore, India and Pakistan would have to carry that respective burden if they are not able to find a common modus vivendi, as Mr. Puri was suggesting, to cooperate on the question of terror. So essentially, I would like to just end by saying, I mean, if we stop interfering with each other's plumbing and each other's piping, I think maybe we can possibly make some progress towards at least having a civilized conversation on issues which lie completely outside the domain of contention. Thanks. And I'll answer your question.
Manish, like a good lawyer, said everything except answering the question that was put to him. Yes, so Manish, I must allow you to come back to the question. I said that the Congress followed a very soft line on Pakistan, and it got us nowhere. So is it time, therefore, to give Prime Minister Modi's tough line on Pakistan a chance? That was my question. With the mic, please.
Off the bat, what does a tough line mean? Does a tough line mean that we put up a wall from Kashmir to Kathiawar and forget that Pakistan exists, and Pakistan also goes and climbs a tall, tall tree and forgets that India exists? Is that the tough line that we are talking of? Number two, is the tough line that we are talking about, is it hot pursuit? Is the tough line that we are talking about aggression? I think these are completely and absolutely immature and childish paradigms, if at all anybody is even contemplating them. The fact is that you are two nuclear-armed states. You have a history of contention. You've been, unfortunately, joined by geography but serrated by history. And that's a reality that you have to live with. Now, you can live with that reality in two ways. Either continue to be antagonistic, and as the former foreign minister was saying, all of us grew up. I'm going to be almost pushing 50. And in the last 5 decades, all that we have seen is this frozen turbulence. I often think to myself, is this the kind of world I would like to bequeath to my daughter? Or is there a way that we can find of coming out of this impasse? And I think the way really is to possibly find a common ground with regard to regional conversations, because bilateral conversations are not working, and maybe use that as the lever in order to build trust and faith, what Nalan was alluding to.
You're calling a tough line immature and childish, and Hina Rabbani Khar said that it's been one-way traffic with India. Pakistan's gestures of statesmanship have not been reciprocated. Now, Nawaz Sharif, we know, took a big decision by coming to Delhi to attend the Prime Minister's swearing-in, despite stiff opposition internally. And at that time, you go and draw what Hina calls a new red line, a line which didn't exist previously, not just in Manish's government, but in your own government under Prime Minister Vajpayee. So you draw a new red line, which is considered unreasonable, which had never been mentioned earlier. And Manish is calling this position childish and immature.
Let me start with what Ms. Khar said. Unfortunately, I've been a realist always. I've been a student of history. And as far as I see it, I've only studied two examples. Excuse me. I've studied only two examples in history where the domestic situation called for an aggressive foreign policy to unite the domestic constituency. And I've seen that way back with Bismarck in Germany, and that was a long time ago. And I see it clearly in Pakistan, where the domestic constituency and its contradictions need to have something beyond which unites them all despite their contradictions. Then second is, and this is not just my perception, I think it's also a question that's raised globally. Where is the power center in Pakistan? Democracy hasn't got its roots. And every time there's a democratically elected civilian government, the relationship with the permanent entity of power, the army, is there. There is another agency, which is the ISI, which of course officially would be under the powers, but there is. Then there is something which Pakistan innovatively refers to as the non-state players. They are a constituency of power. Yes, certainly Pakistan faces terrorism. The difference is, from our perspective, we face terrorism too, and we've been saying it for decades. We see the roots of it many times emanating from our western border. We do not have a constituency of looking at terrorism.
Naren, I must interrupt to say that you're not answering the question. The question is, you've drawn a new red line.
I'm coming.
Meeting the Hurriyat was never a problem under Prime Minister Vajpayee.
I'm coming.
So why then should it be a problem now?
So I'm just saying, where is the difference?
Nawaz Sharif's act of statesmanship has not been reciprocated by Prime Minister.
Fair enough.
Answer this question.
Yes, because that's this background.
And the problem with lawyers is they say what they want to without answering the question. Yes, Nalin.
No.
Just answer the question about drawing a new red line.
I am coming to that. This background is critical because the red line is linked to this. We cannot have dialogues or we cannot have achievement in trying to help each other's domestic constituencies. We have to have it for the relationship that needs to benefit both the nations. It can't be that let's give them a chance, let's give us a chance. It has to be for achieving something. For example, the SAARC, and I'll come to the red line last. The SAARC, increasing connectivity or an agenda that can be non-partisan and that could benefit all, is a way forward. Maybe if there is some movement, certainly bilateral issues may be built even on a multilateral success. Now on the red lines with the Hurriyat, we've desired to talk with Pakistan. Pakistan reciprocated to accept that gesture. They decided, as our government has put it as frankly as that, to talk to the separatists in Jammu and Kashmir on the eve of that talk. So therefore, nobody stops the Pakistani High Commissioner from meeting anyone. We are a good democracy and it's been happening for a long time. However, when they seek to prefer or when they prefer to speak with the separatists in Jammu and Kashmir, rather than the government of India, we made our point clear and we stick to that point.
Hina Rabbani, how would the government in Islamabad feel if the Indian High Commissioner in Islamabad insists on meeting Baluch separatists each time before meeting the democratically elected government in Pakistan?
This is the interesting part, and I'm so glad that you asked this question. And I am going to answer the red line immediately, and that is not going to be the last on my priority list. Listen, there is a fact, as I said, we cannot be delusional. The fact is that we do have, whether India likes to admit it, accept it, wants to be a student of history and not remember a Security Council resolution that exists, which talks about a plebiscite, which did not happen for the last many, many years. That all done. If Pakistan wanted to up the ante, if Pakistan wanted to continue with this trend of a hostile relations with India, Pakistan would say plebiscite first and everything else after. I have repeatedly said that Pakistan has shown itself to be a country which has wanted to move beyond the antagonistic and hostile relations with India. However, the gesture needs to be reciprocated. Now let's talk about this red line. You know, I call it a new red line because there is a precedent that every foreign minister who has come to India, to New Delhi, to hold talks with the Indian government, every Prime Minister of Pakistan who has come to New Delhi to hold talks with the Indian Prime Minister or anyone else and the Pakistani High Commissioner in New Delhi has repeatedly over the last 67 years met Hurriyat leadership.
Ms. Khat, there's a difference. There is a difference, and the difference is that this is when foreign secretaries were meeting to find a way of resuming the dialogue process, as opposed to, say, Nawaz Sharif coming to India where Kashmir is being discussed, then you want to meet the Hurriyat. That's a different context. Here you are just meeting to find a way to get back on the dialogue table. At that time, an act of provocation is indeed a red line.
I think I would like to answer the question that you asked first directly by saying that please do not compare the Kashmir situation to the Baloch situation, because Balochistan is a province of Pakistan. There is no Security Council resolution which requires a plebiscite to find out what the future of Balochistan ought to be. So we ignore, and again, you see, it's a matter of perception. I think we've heard the word perception in practically every dialogue that we've heard. Every statement talks about perception because perception becomes bigger than reality. Now, when there is state apparatus which is stroking the perception of hatred and of the other as the enemy, then clearly we have no room to move forward. And I'm appalled at the gesture, you know, and I say all of this because, as I said, I think, let me just say that again, once again, to qualify what I say as unaggressive, because I'm not trying to be aggressive, or I'm just trying to be a realist here, right? That Pakistan, I truly believe that Pakistan-India normalization is imperative to Pakistan's future. Now that's a case, or that's a decision that Pakistani leadership has already reached. Therefore, the political or the domestic compulsions are no more driven on the hatred of India. I'll give you a simple example. Look at the speeches which were made by every political leader of Pakistan pre-election 2013. And look at the speeches which were made by every Indian leader your election. Even Maulana Fazlur Rahman, the right-wing religious parties, will not stroke the India emotion in trying to get votes. It's become a non-issue because we have realized that this is not what Pakistan's identity ought to be. Please do the same for Indian elections, and you see one after the other. And really, Rahul, I would be very concerned, and I'm not an Indian, so I don't need to be concerned about it, but the Indians in the room, I would be very concerned about the secular credentials of India today. And it's not about BJP, I think it's about Prime Minister Modi. Because Prime Minister Vajpayee was probably, still stands out as one of the few statesmen who had the guts to move beyond what history, the cards that history played out. He wanted, and it was a huge missed opportunity. I think we have both India and Pakistan to blame for it. And coming from there to an unending story of missed opportunities, such as the one that we had with trade, such as the one that we had with back-channel dialogue on Kashmir. Now, back-channel dialogue exists because the dispute is first accepted to be a dispute. We have resumed dialogue, and we have all sorts of interesting nomenclature that we use for the dialogue that takes place between the two countries, and in each one of those, Kashmir was an issue. So how can you sit here and tell me that this is not a new red line?
I need to respond to one comment. The rest of it we keep responding in any case. It's about the secular credentials of India being concerned. I think that cannot be defined on the basis of how we deal with Pakistan. Certainly not with Pakistan. We'll worry about our own secular credentials, looking at our own internal track records. And India, thankfully, is secular. And it has remained secular despite how others may want to paint us. With regard to Pakistan, I can't say the same, but you may defend your track record. But let's not draw the secular debate here, because that itself is, I think, fascinating to say the least. In terms of what is the status of minorities, at least I do not see any Indian Muslim seeking to take citizenship of Pakistan, although the two-nation theory was there in 47.
Okay, if we go down this road...
No, that's why I said, let's leave the secular...
Yeah.
That's why I would suggest. And second is, while Prime Minister Modi, and I said it right at the front, he came up with a bold move, and graciously, Nawaz Sharif did acknowledge it. We acknowledge that.
So here
but we are within our right to have our differences, and we can't draw in our prime ministers and say disappointment. I'd say the same. What was Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif doing when Kargil was happening? You could be signing Lahore, and you could have the intrusions in Kargil. So we can go back one by one. I said history, as a student of it, you can't ignore it. Okay. You may want to move ahead, but you can't ignore it, otherwise we do it at our own peril.
But Nalin, look at what the BJP government is now telling Pakistan.
The government of India.
Yes, the government of India is now telling
with the BJP as leading it.
One, stop funding terrorists, stop infiltrating terrorists, stop talking to the Hurriyat. If all of this happens, then what will India and Pakistan talk about? The whole process of dialogue is to find solutions to the tricky issues. You're asking them to back off on everything that they've done, and then there'll be nothing left to talk about.
Well, perhaps many of these things...
unreasonable?
Well, perhaps many of these things may help Pakistan solve its own problems of terrorism. I mean, actually, one side is we will take all the measures we need to take, and they will take all the measures they need to take for protection of their citizens, and we will for ours. That's part of national policy. It's not as if it's a favor to one or the other. But the second part about it, these are the questions that are hampering it. Every time there is a movement for peace, a Chitti Singh Pura would take place if a foreign dignitary came. So therefore, terrorism does raise its head, whether by state policy or external to it.
Manish,
to unsettle a process, you have to recognize that.
Manish, is it reasonable for the Indian government to suggest to the Pakistan government, stop funding terrorists, stop infiltrating terrorists, no ceasefire violation, no talking to the Hurriyat, and only then will we talk? Or if all of these conditions get met, then frankly you have nothing left to talk about, and Mr. Puri can go to Kabul for dinner.
Well, I think if all these conditions do get met, there's a lot of things to talk about, because that becomes really the starting point and not the finishing point. See, what we need to really understand, Rahul, is that when a large number of countries in Asia and Africa emerged from the yoke of colonialism, the one thing that they affirmed to each other was that they will not transgress into the Westphalian sovereignty of each other. Therefore, when you have a situation, and I do not want to get into a quibble about the past, but when you have a situation whereby repeatedly there is documentary evidence which emerges that non-state actors are using Pakistani territory either in active collusion with the state or to the detriment of the state in order to attack India. That's a reality that you have to live with. After all, there is a part of the 26/11 trial which is taking place in Pakistan as we speak today. So therefore, if the 26/11 attack, which was perhaps the most horrendous attack which could have taken place, a part of the trial takes place in Pakistan, it is in itself an acknowledgement of the fact that there is a problem. And I do not want to get on to the rhetorical horse, but Osama bin Laden was caught in Abbottabad. He wasn't caught in Allahabad. So therefore, for Pakistan to turn around and say that we are victims of terror, that may be also good. But the fact also remains that unfortunately, when you sowed the wind, you have to reap the whirlwind. And on the question of plebiscite in Kashmir, I just want to make a historical correction. If you actually read that Security Council resolution properly, that Security Council resolution says that, first of all, there has to be a withdrawal of troops from Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. And after that, there would be a withdrawal of troops on the Indian side, and then the plebiscite can go ahead. So the first condition, which is mentioned in the Security Council resolution, itself did not get fulfilled. So that's why I've been saying repeatedly, let's not become prisoners of the past. Let us not try and find solutions to issues which we have not found over the last 6 decades. Let's find issues or subjects that we can have a conversation about so that we can start building some kind of a foundational trust. Then maybe for a later generation to take these more contentious issues and find a resolution.